Hello, and welcome back to the special edition of the ILEETA Learning Lab. I'm Joe Willis, the Deputy Executive. Try that one more time. I've never restarted, but here we go. No more restarts.
I like the energy, bro. And the beard.
Yeah, well, the beard sells it. Somebody said you need to have ILEETA logos on your shirts when you're doing these. And I thought to myself, there's one up here. There's one at the top of the screen. And my beard is kind of the logo, right? It's, you know, signature, that's my brand. All right, let's try this one more time. Hello, and welcome back to the special edition of the ILEETA Kenny, what the hell? First time ever. It must be you. You're making me nervous.
Hey, you know, bald black guy.
Exactly. Gets me every time.
All right.
Hello, and welcome back to the special edition of the ILEETA Learning Lab. I'm Joe Willis, the Deputy Executive Director for ILEETA. I'm here today with Kenny Bigbee Jr. from Killa BEE Tactical. Now, he and his co-instructor, Chris Mandigma, are doing a class at the 2026 ILEETA Conference and Expo called Weapons-Based Grappling. And if I understand correctly, that's your baby. That's something you kind of came up with, and Chris kind of adds a little bit of a dimension on the edged weapons and tertia perspective. So I cannot wait to talk to you about how this class came to be, what inspired you to do it, and more importantly, what are we going to learn at the ILEETA conference? So without any further ado, man, right over to you. Tell us about it.
Joe, first of all, it's an honor to be here with you, and an honor for ILEETA to have me on board to contribute to the officers that are protecting our nation and the best people we could ask for to protect our country. That being said, the last honor is to be on board with you in your swagger, sexy beard. Can't beat it. So you got me beat. You added some swagger down below, right? So that being said, weapons-based grappling. Why and what is it? The primary purpose of weapons-based grappling, especially for law enforcement, is two-pronged. As a civilian, as a law enforcement officer, you must always understand that there's always a weapon in the fight. You're always bringing some type of firearm, some type of taser, some type of weapon that's going to be involved. Also, in any fighting environment, you should always assume it's a weapons-based environment. And further down the rabbit hole, we have three prongs that we're going to approach, and that are what does it do for you? It protects the officer safety, it protects the subject that's involved, and also the public that's around. So we're hitting that, and then we're also giving you the techniques, tactics, and procedures that give you the capacity to enforce the protection of the officers, of the subject involved, and the public. So when those two combine, now we have the capacity to have a decision tree and the capacity to enforce that decision tree to follow through on protecting the inalienable rights. So that's what weapons-based grappling is, keeping everybody safe and protecting the inalienable rights with techniques, tactics, and procedures with proper decision trees based upon that.
I love it. And, you know, from the perspective of that rapidly evolving fight in that weapons-based environment, and I love how you said that. We all know it to be true. There is no environment that a police officer will enter into while on duty unless it's a very extreme undercover situation where you won't have at least some sort of a firearm on you at any given time. So there's always a weapon present, and one should assume that as soon as we go hands-on, it's weapons-based grappling. So on that note, kind of talk me through how you approach that mindset of it's always weapons-based grappling. I'm in this space and I want to protect everyone around me. Talk me through kind of the mindset.
That's a really good question, Joe. So in the law enforcement world in particular, whenever you're going to control a situation, control a subject, control a scenario, and you have to go hands-on, now you've entered the environment of weapons-based grappling. I believe it was Jocko that said, if somebody talks crazy, you can walk away. If somebody tries to hit you, you can run away, right? But when you go hands-on, somebody grabs you, you can't just disengage. So law enforcement adds another level to it because of the code that they've agreed to, that they've sworn by. They often have to engage and remain engaged in those situations where they're actually making contact and grappling with that person. That being said, like we said, they have They have guns, whatever on them, any type of weapons that are on them. And the subject may also, and we have to assume that now that we've made contact, whether that's just a control to escort, whether that's to make an arrest or a high risk arrest, now we have to understand standing and on the floor, those techniques, tactics, and procedures that allow us to facilitate that. So that's the approach, is that whenever you engage and make contact, now you're in a weapons-based grappling environment, and all the rules of jiu-jitsu, all the rules of striking, all the rules change because it's a weapons-based environment and you're grappling. So that individual approach is what makes it unique, is that the rules change. You can't do regular jiu-jitsu. You can't do regular striking. You can't do regular tactics because you have to take considerations of safety and also tactics with the weapons involved.
Now, you come at this from kind of a unique perspective. You got a BJJ background. Tell us a little bit about kind of how this evolved and, you know, a little bit about your military experience, where what brought this about? How did you develop the training, and why is this so important to address?
Well, I'm going to give you the PC version of it. So people ask me, what do you do? I'll say I teach John Wick skits. I usually describe it a little bit differently, but I teach John Wick skits. What is that? Integrated tactics and combatives. So what does that mean? Firearms, blades, and the combatives that integrate with that simultaneously and synergistically. My background, obviously, I was a former Navy SEAL, so that's the tactical side, but also I'm a jiu-jitsu guy, 3rd degree black belt in jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai guy, tons of MMA with several guys that went into the house on the UFC fighters, and I'm also a blade guy. So in this environment, there are not very many players that can see it from every angle and connect those dots. That's what I like to contribute, is what I like to call combative concepts that connect the dots of all those worlds and make them make sense. So I like to say that I can speak to that because I have an expertise and a high level in each one of those avenues, and I'm able to connect the dots and then make it simple and translate that to everybody, for everyone. And that came about, we were doing stuff like that in the military a while back when we were having to go in and then grab somebody and do a snatch and grab for whatever purpose that was. And we started to play with the idea. I started to fight it out and then find the flaws. So there's a difference between theory. Modern science, as a matter of fact, no longer really calls things laws. And this is an interesting fact. Here's why. Because at one point they thought Newtonian physics was the answer to everything. And then they found some things that was still proper, but there are some things that superseded. And then Einstein's laws, the theory of relativity. And then there's things that superseded that. So what I mean is none of this is static. It's always adaptable. It's always amenable. But there's some broad stroke tools and concepts that will help you to solve the problem in the heat of the moment.
Broad stroke concepts. I really like how you said that. And you said something else in there. I've never heard it said like that before, but it totally makes sense to me. Fight it out, right? So you mentioned early on that the decision trees and that sort of stuff. Anyone who's been in the space knows that these are rapidly evolving, very dynamic, often incredibly violent situations. And so a decision tree, like we might think about it in engineering, where if this happens, yes, if this happens, no, it's not always that simple. And we get that implicitly here. Kind of talk me through what you mean by I fought it out. I love that idea.
Yeah. So, well, I'll show you. I can show you better than I can tell you. How about that, Joe?
Okay.
I don't know if you can see that right there. There's a scar right there.
You sure can. In your armpit, like where your delt meets your back. Yeah.
So I did all the heavy lifting for the guys so they don't have to do what I did. And being a hard-headed Navy SEAL, I actually blew my bicep off my arm battle testing these techniques. Then they had to put it back on. So I was actually getting on the ground, fighting it out, see what works, see what doesn't. On average, whenever I teach, Joe, I teach high frequency, high probability. What's that mean? So I like to say in the warrior mindset, all of law enforcement or anybody that would stand up for inalienable rights are warriors, right? I like to say, and my brand, Killa BEE Tactical, the slogan is wake up your warrior and be elite. So we want to wake up that inner courage to face whatever adversity is in front of you. Now, there are no guarantees. That's the first thing you must understand. But what there are is probabilities. And we always fight to the highest probability of survivability. So there are no direct answers. So Joe, to say a technique is the right thing at the right time to the right stimulus. But the only constant, especially in combatives, is chaos. So what we all like to say in the tactical world, we don't rise to the level of our training, we fall to the level of our training. So if you train at 100%, maybe you'll get 60 to 70% of efficiency and effectiveness in the engagement, right? So what does that mean? I'm doing this technique, but the chaos, now the bad guy changes. Now I got hurt. Now I got injured. Maybe there's people in the way. Now that technique is no longer right. So we have to transcend the right thing at the right time, at the right moment, to the right stimulus, to being relevant. What's relevant? Relevant is a concept. So and what are concepts? Concepts are tools. So if I give you a hammer and I take this hammer and I said it's only used for nails, and then somebody approaches you and threatens you and your livelihood, and I go, well, this is only for nails. But if I tell you on a broad stroke concept that this is an impact object, now I can use it to break glass. If I was sinking in a car, in a river, now I could use it to defend myself. Now I could use it to pry. It's also a pry object. So I give you these broad stroke tools that are 80 to 90% effective under pressure by fighting it out and battle testing it. This worked most of the time against also what happens most of the time. So when I say there are no guarantees, the warrior mindset, the courage to face adversity when needed, there are no guarantees, but there are probabilities. And we fight to the highest probability of survivability. What does that mean? The things that happen most of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, and the things that work against what happens 80, 90% of the time. And we discover that the hard way. So I blew my bicep off my arm. They put it back on. Now I was like, this doesn't look quite right. And then, because obviously I didn't remain still and stagnant. And then I went back to the guy that actually made did the surgery that made the most progressions for this specific surgery. He said, do you know you blew it back off? I said, they drilled through your arm and then put a titanium plate. He said, do you know you blew it back off? I said, my tendon or the titanium? He said, you broke the titanium back off. We're putting it back on. And then they put another cross stitching there. And when I woke back up, and I said, what's that for? He said, for tenacious individuals like you. I said, you mean for hard-headed individuals like me, right? He said, yeah. He said, you said it, I didn't. So after 6 months, you talk about pressure testing it. He said, hey, I had 6 months, I had to be still. He's like, don't do it again. I said, all right, doc, sure thing. So I did a check-in at 3 months. And he goes, hey, how have you been? I said, I've done pretty good. I haven't done anything, all except for in Brazil, there's a unit called GER, Grupo Especial de Reacción. And they are like legendary SWAT members down there. And they're all jiu-jitsu black belts, MMA fighters, judo black belts. And there's a guy that was doing gun retention in Brazil. And his name is Tiny. It was his nickname. He's 6'3", 290. And it's on my IG. We ended up battling it out. And I had this injured. And we ended up fighting it out. And the Brazilians, it's called porrada, which means fight with intensity, right? He went viral because he was doing gun retention. And they were saying, now morte, irmão, now morte. And he was elbowing them. And they were saying, don't kill him. In Brazil, they do everything full tilt. So I got them there, battle tested it out with them. And they were like, you're allowed to come back anytime. We really like your techniques. We really like your tactics. And we like your mindset because you really get after it and show that it's real.
Yeah, I think that mindset piece is so important. So let's talk about that from a reality. I almost said reality based, but a realistic training perspective. I did an interview with Matt Bloodgood, who's a fellow ILEETA instructor at this coming conference. And one of the things he challenged the audience with is if you knew your trainee was going to be in a fight for their life tonight, what would you do differently? If the answer is anything, then why aren't you doing it? And so I think you kind of approach it from a very similar perspective. So how do you, in your training environment, work with somebody who maybe isn't all that skilled or experienced, and you bring them into the space and start evolving them? How do you find that threshold where probability meets severity, and there's that matrix there, but you're training them realistically for what they might face? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. My immediate goal is to get everybody involved as good as possible, as fast as possible, right? And the way that we do that is we do 3 layers of training. The first layer is technical. And what is that for? We show them the body mechanics, the proper body mechanics, right? Perfect practice makes perfect. The next layer is tactical. This is where you have to discover the opportunity to apply the technique. Just because you know the technique doesn't mean you know the pre-fight indicators of when and how to apply it.
Right.
And now we went from perfect practice and we went from peak performance to a lower level of performance because it's chaotic and it's messy, right? So now we have to play in that area. So that's called specific training. Some people call it ecological training. So we might do that with 3 or 4 variables. So now there's 3 or 4 variables that we throw in there, and that person has to recognize the pre-fight indicators and then make the proper conceptual reaction. And then the very last level is tenacity or intensity. So now we add a little bit more pressure, right? So we went from peak performance, then we fell to optimal performance. Optimal performance is where you do the best with what you have or what you can, because it's never going to be perfect. Now we're getting close to real life. And then the last level, intensity, is now we're going to add a little bit of stressor. Okay. And now what are you actually training there? You're training to metabolize all the hormones that run through your body. You have to deal with you. And that's the last thing you do. So now we add factors in such as speed, such as more power, more intensity, but that's the very last thing. So, and this is how you do it. You start off with the technique or the concept. Now you make it a little bit chaotic with variables, or they're just playing very lightly. You have to recognize the opportunity, and it's not perfect. And then the last one, we learn how to metabolize stress, sympathetic and parasympathetic, how to move from reaction to response and be able to control and utilize that adrenaline dump. And that's where a lot of officers run into trouble, because they've not trained in that in each one of those phases. And Joe, I'd like to say this: you're using different parts of the mind when you train like that. So
yes, go on, build on that if you would. I couldn't agree with you more, and I want to hear what you have to say on that.
Yes, sir. So I'm quite nerdy, so I'm gonna go a little bit down the nerdy rabbit hole here, Joe. Bro. And
yep.
When you're training, so you go through different phases: unconscious incompetency. You don't know what you don't know. Conscious incompetency. Now you become aware, like, I didn't know that, right? Then you get to conscious competency, where you got to think about it. And then unconscious competency, where it's muscle memory, essentially, right? And also in different phases of your training, you're in different areas of the brain. The frontal cerebral lobe, the frontal neonatal cortex, it has inhibition. That's where you're thinking consciously. So right at that time period where we're training technically, we want to train very slowly, because as soon as you add speed and intensity, it shuts the frontal cerebral lobe down. Now you can't think. And now we have bad technique. We want perfect technique because it's going to be messy in the chaos. So if we do it at 100, it'll be at a 70 in chaos. So when we're training on that front end of technical, we want very little stress. We want it to be very relaxed. And you're in the frontal neonatal cortex. When we add any level of chaos, whether that's variables, we just say you got 20 seconds. When we add any level of variable, that the first thing that happens in the sympathetic nervous system, that shuts down the frontal cerebral lobe. And the reason for that, Joe, is your conscious mind moves at about 128 bits per second. It's hyper intelligent, but very slow. And that's what we learn the technique with. So we grab the technique with that part of the mind. But the subconscious mind moves at 50 million bits per second. And the rate of 128 bits per second is about the speed that you could text as fast as you could if you were like a teenage high school girl or something like that, right? And we've all been there, Joe, where we're texting, and you're like, dude, just call me. This is too slow. It's getting on my nerves. All dudes are like that. You know what I'm saying?
True
And
story.
yeah, let's go fast. So what's your brain doing? It's like somebody breaks in the house and you're right there to bump in the night, and there's a frying pan, and 20 feet away, there's a firearm. You're not going to be like, excuse me, sir, give me 1 second. Let me traverse over there and let me grab that pistol. You don't have time. Your brain is going to grab whatever's near it because it's the fastest thing for survivability. That's what your brain's doing. It shuts down the frontal neonatal cortex and it goes, I need to grab whatever I know or the lack thereof, and I'm going to use that. So if you don't have good training, you're going to have a poor reaction or response because it's just going to do whatever it knows or doesn't know to do. If you have good quality training, good technique, good opportunity recognition, and then you're able to metabolize stress, then you're going to have the highest probability, no guarantee, but the highest probability of creating success. So when we're training somebody new, we take them through those phases. Technical, where it's perfect practice makes perfect for peak performance. Tactical, opportunistic, optimal. Find the opportunity, right? And now you're in optimal performance, doing the best with what you can. That's real life. Yeah. And then the last one is intensity, right? And that's where you learn how to metabolize stress. And those are the phases that we'll do during the seminar. Real chill, real light. It's not overwhelming. You also go at the pace of your capacity. You can do all those phases at different intensities to maximize things.
Thank you for clarifying that. And I think that's one of those things that I love that you brought into this. And you also mentioned your own term for ecological dynamics, right? It's training specificity or specific training.
Yes, sir. And yes, sir.
I think this is super important and a big part of the conversation to be had. EcoD, CLA, they're great methodologies and not methodologies, but frameworks. But A, they were never intended to be specific training methodologies. And B, good trainers have been doing it for a very long time. And so I love how you said that within the space that you have and the capacity of the individual, you can scale and perform these progressively. And I think that's an important distinction for folks who are still somewhat trying to come along in this space where, well, if I do that, I just got to go 100%, all out when I move into that phase 2 so that I can see what optimal. No. Let's gradually move this person through a learning zone where they can be successful, not every single time, but they learn from their mistakes. Am I hearing you correctly in that?
100%. That was brilliant. And what would be the ratio, right? So here's another nerdy fact. We learn through play.
Yes, sir.
So when you're doing everything technically correct, okay, we're getting it down super slow, super methodical. That's where you get it right. Yeah. Next, we need to get. So now, and in that specific training or that ecological training or scenario-based training, where it's playful, it's not fighting, it's playful.
Go bang.
You put something out there. What are you gonna do with that? Oh, and then they're a little confused, and you let them solve it. And what would that ratio kind of look like? You mentioned like not every time. You said something really brilliant there, and I love it. Not every
time.
Don't
ask me to say it again. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah, right. You said they won't get it right every time. They don't have to get it right every time. So if they're failing every time, they're not growing. If they're succeeding every time, they're not growing. A ratio of something like 3 out of 5. Yep. When you are on the border of failure, you're growing. That's where your mind is solving problems. It's having success, but it's being pushed just beyond its limit. That's where we want to teeter. And where does that happen most? Bruce Lee said it best. He said, be playful, but play hard. So in that specific training, in that scenario-based training, we're being playful. I'm just posing you little problems. There's a time where you build your partner. Then there's a time where we train on the intensity phase where we're training to pressure test to beat the partner. But most of the time we're training to build the partner. Now I'm challenging you. 3 out of 5 times you get it right, but you're doing too good. I got to turn it up a little. I got to propose a problem that you have trouble with and you have to work through it. It's playful though. And we're building each other. We're not trying to beat each other.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. And it's that Csikszentmihalyi flow concept here that we're working with where skill and challenge are like the perfect point where a person comes into flow, where they exactly meet the level of their skill, meets the level of the challenge, and they go into this mindless space of unconscious competence where it's just happening. If I increase challenge just a little past their skill, as you just said, the probability of not being successful increases, but not so much that they're going to go into condition black or like just shut down on me. They're going to play, as you said.
Yes.
And I love how you worded that. And that's a great quote from Bruce Lee to kind of bring us into that space.
Yeah, I remember last year you were talking about some of those dynamics, because you and I chatted and you were talking about those dynamics of skill and all those things meeting at a cross point. And that's perfect. That's what we're trying to do. And we rats, so they bring up like rats, ugly little rats. You think they're just basic creatures. Here's when we're talking about training. A young rat, if the bigger rat keeps dominating it, the young rat won't play with them anymore. And what are they doing when they play? They're learning how to fight. They're learning how to protect. All animals, all mammals.
Lion cubs are a great example of that too, right? Like watch lion cubs. They're learning to hunt and kill, but they're playing.
Yes, they're playing. And that's where we grow too. We're no different. The neural circuit for learning actually happens on the play circuit, literally.
Love it. Yes.
And so now if you have somebody that's being too dominant,
it's not playing anymore.
The person doesn't want to play anymore. That's how it goes. You'll do that with little kids. If you're just bullying the kid, he won't play with you anymore. Guess what? So he stops learning. So we got to ride that line where it also gets boring if you win every time.
To win every time, yeah. Exactly. If it's easy, who wants to do this? So there's a zone in training, and you're hitting the nail on the head here. I'm excited for this class, man. I'll tell you, my conversation with Chris the other day, now with you. I mean, you two, when you train together, you're like this. I don't know. It's this dynamic duo thing that you have. It's super cool to watch. You both come at it from slightly different angles. You're a blade guy, but he's also done some MMA stuff as well. But where those two things meet, super cool. So unfortunately, we're going to run out of time here. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to you for the last words. If I come into your class, what am I leaving with?
Nice. 3 primary things. You're going to have a better understanding of making broad stroke decisions in relationship to protecting officer safety, public safety, and also the subject. The next thing, the techniques, tactics, and procedures of how to actually enforce that and navigate that. And the third thing, there's 3 things we need in training. We need mindset, like you talked about, methodology, the actual methods, techniques, tactics, and procedures, okay, and metrics. Here's some metrics to have what gives us success and what does not, so that we can actually quantify success. You'll walk away with those things: to protect everyone involved, techniques, tactics, and procedures, and the mindsets and metrics to make it real.
I love that. I'm stealing that from you too. That quote there at the end: mindset, methods, and metrics. Yes, super important, man. I wish I had like a big red pen I could underline that statement with. Yes, all 3 of those, phenomenal. It's going to be an outstanding class, just like your class was last year. Highly regarded, well evaluated. I'm super excited to see you guys again, just about 3.5 weeks away. So, Kenny, thank you so much for being here with me today, spending this time with the ILEETA members on the Learning Lab. And I look forward to seeing you soon, brother.
Look forward to seeing you too, my brother. The honor's mine.
Awesome. Very good. You mind sticking around for a second here? I got a couple quick questions.
Sure.